Morning, everybody. It's good to be here. It's always a pleasure to come up to the city or come up to the center. I'm going to be talking about a project. This is more a project that's we're just getting started on. So it'll be a little bit different than some of the other speakers today that are talking about previous work. But this is very much something that we're really excited about. I'm with one of the statewide programs in UC Ag and Natural Resources Division. We're not as big as some of the other programs like 4-H or Integrated Pest Management, but I'm with the GIS group, and we're a small technical unit, about five people, spread out in 5 different locations. We do anything related to mapping, just working with spatial data, from basic cartography, making wall maps, to all kinds of web mapping projects. The last couple of years, we've been using drones a lot, to fly drones for research primarily. We're doing a 3-day workshop next month in Monterey, if anyone's interested in learning how to use drones for mapping, and so on and so forth. So it's a great unit to be part of. The other group whose work is being represented here today is the GIS Center at the UC Berkeley, which is where I'm based. The Geospatial Innovation Facility has been the primary engine for CalAdapt, which is the climate data repository that I'm going to be talking about today. And most of their funding has come from the California Energy Commission. So this is kind of new material for us. We got into working with climate data and spatial climate data through a project that we just developed last year. It's called the California Adaptation Clearinghouse. It's kind of like a search engine for climate plans, adaptation plans from cities, from businesses, from agencies all over California. So there's a couple resources there related to rangelands, but it's a really interesting resource to check out. So resilientca.org is something you might want to peruse it sometime. All of these, there's 200 or 300 of these resources. They've all been vetted and reviewed by experts, and the Office of the Governor has sort of gone through this stuff. So that's been a good project to work on. I like this graphic about how we think about weather versus climate, short-term versus long-term. So we think about weather as what you should wear each day. So, a raincoat versus sunglasses, whereas climate is going to be the information that will tell us what do we need to have in our closet, how many sweaters, how many umbrellas, and so forth. So the difference between weather and climate is a big part of that is going to be the time frame, short-term versus long-term. So weather can help us, and weather forecasts can help us make short-term decisions, maybe on a monthly basis, maybe a seasonal forecast, thinking out a couple months or so. Whereas the climate data, both the past as well as the future, predicted data, those are going to give us information to help us make decisions about planning longer-term rangeland development strategies. So an example of how that might come into play, so both of these types of information are expressed in terms of probability. We hear a forecast, there's a 40% chance of rain tomorrow, or there's an 80% chance of frost. So a grower might use that kind of information to make a decision about whether or not he or she should put in frost protection strategies, if they're growing crops. Climate information, it's also probabilistic, makes it a little bit more difficult to work with, but it's expressed in terms of the probabilities that there's going to be more fires, there'll be more frost occurrences, there'll be more extreme heat days, but we're used to that, and we can think about those probabilities and come up with longer-term strategies for adapting to changing climates. So one thing that we pick out of the climate data, particularly the future data, is it's not an exact science, we know that for sure, but the trends are there's a lot of consensus on where the trends are going, and the climate information, the data, also helps us understand the range of variability that we could expect. So that's definitely going to be an important thing to think about. It's not just the trend, but also the variability. So I'm definitely not a rancher, but I had the good fortune to attend a drought workshop that Dan put on a couple months ago. And from what I gleaned, these are some of the short-term and long-term strategies that are common on rangelands to deal with when the weather's not cooperating. So in the short term, you can buy or change the amount of stock that you're producing to deal with the amount of forage and the amount of water you have. Purchasing feed or hauling water, those are two ways to kind of artificially adapt, at least in the short term, with changing resources. Modifying how you manage your pastures, how you move the animals around in a way that take advantage of water availability, take advantage of when forage is at its peak production, taking advantage of growing cycles, and then off-ranch income was another theme that we heard. So in the, maybe in the 1 month up to a year or two, those are some of the common strategies. Longer term, thinking about water infrastructure investments. Should we put a new well, a new tank, some piping somewhere? We move water around the ranch. There are insurance programs, which might make sense, thinking long term. Leasing arrangements and the details of leasing are something that I heard ranchers are using, or thinking about for longer term adaptation. Transfer agreements with other water producing districts, and maybe having other pastures or other resources where there might be less of an effect of water shortages. Managing vegetations, we just heard how soil organic matter can help get more water into the pasture, and then diversifying the business income. So there's a range of both short-term and long-term strategies, which I think this is kind of where we would like to find out more in my unit for the project that we're coming up on. So let me talk a little bit about CalAdapt. Raise your hand if you have heard of CalAdapt. Okay, it's gaining attention. It's a website. It's a web application, so it's more than just plain information. You can interact with the data, but it's probably the premier website portal within California for getting access to this really complex climate data, both the historical observed climate as well as the future. And it has a whole bunch of tools. Some allow you to explore the data on the website, making these interactive maps and tables. You can actually download the data either as an Excel file for your area, and then there's links to other resources. And it's definitely a work in progress. It's definitely growing. These are some of the data sets that are under the hood. Most of these are available for both historic as well as projections into the future. Temperature, precipitation, snowpack, wildfire areas, both, again, modeled for the future. A lot of these are kind of based on each other. So, of course, wildfire is modeled based on predicted changes in temperature and precipitation. There's some drought scenarios, stream flow, and so on and so forth. So a good suite of data, of variables that can be helpful. There's a bunch of these interactive tools. I don't know if I have time or want to risk a live demo, but you can certainly play with. I've learned from experience that's a little risky, but there's lots of tools where you click on any of these exploratory tools, and you can do things like define your area of interest. So all of the data that are in CalAdapt have been downscaled to 1/16 of a degree, which is about 3.5 miles. So pixels, right? So cells that are 3.5 by 3.5 miles wide. So that might not sound super downscaled, but compared to the global models that this is all based upon, this is a lot smaller. There are 32, and so when you're in the website, you can either pick the grid cell that you're focused on, or you can upload your own shapefile. But these are large areas. That's important to remember. So on the area of the regions or counties, that kind of thing. And that's generally part of the challenge and reality of working with climate data, is that it's fairly large scale. You can also download the data, as I mentioned. And there's a lot of good documentation about each of the data sets. It's still fairly technical, but there's a lot of resources that can help you understand how the data were developed, who developed them. They've all been scientifically vetted. So there's 32, I think, global climate models for future projections. California, the state of California, has identified 10 of those that are most suitable for California. And then the CalAdapt the default layers that are visible are just 4 of those. And those represent the four climate sets that are selected by default. You can turn them on or off, and you can turn others on and off. But they fall within, you can cover 2 scenarios, these are, one of the challenges of predicting future changes is we don't know how much people will continue to modify the environment and how the other many mechanisms that are changing the climate will unfold. But there are some very standard scenarios based on the amount of concentration of carbon, which is the primary process by which things are changing. 4.5 is, and these are from the International Panel on Climate Change, so global bodies. One is based on kind of a reduction of carbon emissions or peak around 2040, and then they start to go down. And then the other one is kind of business as usual. So this is fairly standard when working with climate data, is that there are these different scenarios based on different assumptions of how quickly carbon concentrations will plateau and then start to go down. Okay, so let me, instead of going to the website, I do have some, very quickly, a couple of PDFs that show what these things would look like. So this is a screen. This is one of the tools, one of the interactive tools. So this is just a PDF of it, though, and there's lots of these interactive charts. You can see you can change your location. You can change the time scale that you're interested in just by changing the little bars on the time axis. You can. Oh my God! I did that. So, yeah, I figured that out. Cool. Okay, thanks. That's good. Okay, so again, this is a screenshot of one of the interactive tools. This is maximum temperature, and there's a lot of interactivity that's been built into this, so it's designed to explore. You can download the data from a chart that you've made. When you're designing the chart, you can change the time period. There's many variables that you can have. Right now, we're seeing, you see the legend here? So right now, we're seeing these 4 scenarios. And those can be, you can turn other ones on and off. So those are for the models. If you want to look at the higher emission standard, so right now we're looking at sort of the lower prediction, the lower trajectory of carbon concentrations. You can click on the other one to see how that would look different. And you can download the data, and then there's fairly user-friendly descriptions of the data that's under the hood, how that graph is being portrayed. So I'll stop with that one, but there's a lot of, they've made a pretty good effort to present the data in a way that's user-friendly. Certainly more user-friendly than the options. That being said, though, it's difficult to work with this kind of data, right? Particularly if you're using it for a specific kind of decision. It's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose. There's lots of models, lots of variability to try to understand. It's just a lot. This is one of the overall challenges. There's a lot of progress in making climate data available, getting access to it, but most people want to use this kind of data for a specific kind of decision purpose. So these are some of the challenges. There's some technical challenges about, which model do I use? What is the time period that I should look at? What spatial scale seems reliable? How do I interpret those ranges? How do you interpret the units, right? So you have to look through and understand what the units of these various data layers represent. Maximum temperature, that's fairly intuitive, but how does that translate into the system that you're trying to manage or the risk you're trying to manage? Thinking about compound impacts. And the big one is, how do you combine this kind of information with other data, such as these models of forage production that Jeremy was talking about, or how we understand the impact that soil organic matter might have, or economic models or risk models that you might think about for your insurance options, right? So our project that's just kicking in, we're just getting started this summer, the goal is to take these kinds of well-vetted scientific data, but to make them more user-friendly and more tailored, not as overwhelming for specific decisions. So this is a project, a 3-year project that the Strategic Growth Council is funding. So we're pleased to be one of the groups that will be working on this goal. Going to try to develop new data sets. So for example, there's already heat degree days, which is what energy sector would like, because they can model how many power plants they're going to need. But we've already started computing growing degree days and chill hours, right, which are 2 metrics which are really important for predicting vegetation growth and so forth. So we're hoping through this process over the next few years that will increase the awareness of how these data can be useful. And one of the things we're going to be working on are these kind of lightweight decision support sites that present just a fraction of the climate data and combine it with other useful data. So for example, this is another website similar to the one that Jeremy showed earlier. This one is developed by Mike Crimmins, who's a extension advisor in Arizona, and it's a much simplified set of tabs and explanations that he uses in his extension work in Arizona to help landowners and ranchers and growers think about their operations and how they can change for moving forward. So we're just getting started here, so I've come to listen and learn about all of the research that's going on, all the models that have been developed to help adapt to climate patterns, and would love to have conversations with anybody who has an idea of how this data could be turned into useful information for your work. And with that, I'll stop and take a question or two.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, appreciate it. We have a minute or two for 1 or 2 questions. I'll get our next speaker set up. If you have anything for Andy. I think, Andy, if you just say one thing about like the ease of making maybe some spatial maps from the data, like on a local ranch or something.
Yeah, very much so. So you can use through just the website right now, you can go and identify your ranch, and you can generate all of those, both historic as well as projected graphs that show how temperature has changed, how precipitation has changed. And if you have a mapping program like GIS software, you can download those in a GIS format and then sort of present them as a map format.